May I now introduce to you the guest speaker for the day, Professor Jeeawody.
Thank you.
Sir, dear colleagues, it is my privilege to introduce to you a distinguished son of the soil, someone who has distinguished himself overseas. He has kindly offered to speak to us on emotional well-being in aviation. Having previously been sensitized to the term emotional intelligence, I must admit that I had to have a look at the dictionary to get an idea of what emotional well-being implied. I read from a website that the COVID-19 outbreak has lowered emotional well-being by a factor of 74%. To me, this suggests our ability to think clearly has been impaired. As a retired person having to spend most of my time at home, this statistic was a surprise to me, and I believe that COVID-19 must have been a shock and a tremor to the working community, and especially so for those in aviation and the hospitality sector. I will let Professor Jeeawody speak to us about this and disentangle our emotional brain from our thinking brain. But first, a few words about Professor Jeeawody. Our guest for this evening was born in Mauritius. He studied, lived and practiced in the UK, Australia, Mauritius and Geneva. He holds a PhD in mental health as well as a master's degree in education from Australia, in addition to his bachelor with honours in psychology and a diploma in health from UK. Being an acclaimed communicator and strategist, Professor Basir received the Vice Chancellor's Teaching Excellence Award in Australia and is a nominee for the Australia Day Citizenship Award for his contribution to civil societies. He is recognized as the Geneva's International Do-Good Citizen. Professor Basir, a senior academic, researcher and author, has had a career spanning over 35 years in operational leadership in international organizations, academia, and strategic organizational development in centralized and decentralized organizations. His many publications include a book titled Successful Aging, Perspectives on Health and Social Constructions, which all retired and prospective retirees should try to grab. Professor Basir has served and facilitated international program initiatives at professorial and dean levels in health in Australia, New Zealand, UK, Papua New Guinea, India, Canada, Japan, Malaysia, Singapore, Switzerland, and of course Mauritius. His contribution in the field of well-being encompasses health, mental health, psychology, psychosocial health, education, management, and diversity. He is the founder president of the Regional Multicultural Council in Australia, whose responsibilities include humanitarian, that is refugees, settlements through government and civil society, supported strategies, and a consortium model. Professor Basir has served as chair of various boards in various government and non-governmental bodies. In Australia, he was on the Community Relations Commission in regional Australia, a member of the National Comorbidity Task Force on Drug Use and Abuse, as well as a member of a national focus group of 12 national experts on the use of focused psychological strategies in better outcomes in mental health initiatives for medical practitioners, Consultative Committee, Aging, Disability. Professor Jeeawody, amicably known as Professor Basir, is the founder, President Emeritus, and guardian of the Global Emotional Wellbeing Institute, EWBI, registered in Geneva and affiliated with numerous professional and international economic and social council organizations connected with the United Nations. A Google search for the emotional well-being Institute will yield websites of the Institute founded by Professor Jeeawody. The EWBI is an alliance between global and regional members. The EWBI's model is based on the lead providers model with global regional cluster groups. Professor Basir's experience as a keynote speaker at international conferences, including as invited speaker at the UN, is varied and has made him a much sought after speaker at graduations, professional and public functions. We are therefore thankful and grateful to Professor Basir for taking time out of his busy schedule to speak to members of the Aeronautical Society this evening. Professor Basir,
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jack. If you were to speak for another 5 minutes, that would be the end of my presentation. I would just say thank you very much for having me. I'm going to go home. Sorry, I didn't realize it was so long.
I'm guilty.
I didn't realize it was so long. So thank you very much for such a generous introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here. Really pleasure to be here. Each time I go and present, I tend to meet new groups of people. So I put myself in a learning process. We never stop learning. I'm hoping that I will be learning a lot from you, and you'll be learning from me as well. Now, this topic is novel for me. This topic is novel for me. When I looked at the subject matter, and then when I looked at my background, then I thought, well, I think it would be good to present this brief seminar presentation from what we call, what I'm going to use, the term is pluralistic, eclectic or pluralistic. Now the nature of the profession you are in, when you look into all these activities which are happening in the world at the baseline, for example, the airport, the passengers, to the cargo system industry, to the public in general, to the businessman, business person, and so on and so forth, you cannot understand the topic in a very tunnel vision way. You have to understand the topic of emotional well-being and aviation from a pluralistic perspective. So I put my pluralistic hat on and I made a list of, look, I'm not a pilot, although I have traveled quite a bit. I do travel quite a bit. That's why, as part of my Dean for International Programs for Health in the UK at Chartered University, enabled me to travel quite a bit and to put in place a number of strategies and number of education programs in different parts of the world. So my exposure for traveling is from that perspective, okay? And then my last travel was in February last year. I was very honored to be invited to do a keynote presentation at the United Nations in February. And the topic was about youth, about the difficulties, the dilemma the youth of the world are facing, and minimizing issues about violence and so on and so forth. It was within the assembly area, and I was very, very privileged to be invited. I was very, very happy. Now, the day I was returning, that was the day the flight stopped. And my friends, my colleagues were asking me to stay for another week. And if I did that, I would be still stuck in Geneva. Now, when I was going to catch my plane, the airport was totally closed. I was going to buy a coffee, I couldn't get a place. Everyone was rushing and so on and so forth. So that was one of my recent experiences, okay? But luckily, I managed to come to Mauritius. I was going to be here for 2 weeks. My family is in Australia. I was going to travel from here to Australia. Then I had 2 more journeys at that time, March, April. One was as a keynote speaker in Morocco, looking at youth issues. I couldn't travel. And then we had another symposium in Nepal, and I couldn't travel. So I was very handicapped. And I'm still not able to travel. I'm still stuck in Mauritius. Luckily, Mauritius is a safe place. It's a beautiful place. It's a pleasure for me to stay here. I've got my family here, my own family, but my own family, children and so on, are in Australia. So I'm here. Now, I was looking at, I've got a list of anecdotes. Now, how can I justify that I'm a little bit knowledgeable about your industry, aviation industry, aeronautical industries. And the first thing which came to me was, look, I'm also a psychometrician. I used to do a lot of testing as a consultant to evaluate to what extent a person is an accident risk. Okay, so the group I worked with was an international trucking company. You know, the big truck, the big camion, they carried up to 12 cars, up to 6 in the top, 6 down bottom, and driving all over the place. And obviously the company I worked for, called Finamos, and obviously they were not silly. They had to make sure that the standard of safety was the top. And the first thing they targeted was the driver, like the pilot, the driver, okay? To what extent they're going to be safe doing the job. So the safer they would be, the better it will be from an insurance perspective, because they won't have to pay that much premium. And the company being safe will attract customers, okay? So I was a consultant for about 4 years. A good friend, a colleague, and myself, we set up psychometric testing for the truck drivers. We actually negotiated to bring along to Australia the equipment, the tools France used to test their own pilots. So we brought that equipment to Australia. We moderated it because we had to pilot it to make sure that it did work, and we implemented that. And we prevented accident by well over 64%. What the equipment did was to find out, which we're talking about human factors. We're talking about to what extent human factors are responsible for accidents, incidents, And what we did was, there were 3 levels of evaluation. The first level was the truck drivers had to put an application. Obviously, they had to have the license for driving, character reference, years of experience, and so on. Once they were shortlisted, they would be called in for an interview. Once they did well, they were recommended to do this psychometric testing, and that's where I came in. So it was a very high level of testing. So I had to evaluate human factors which were responsible for accident. The first thing I tested was to what extent the person is an aggressive person. To an aggressive person. So there was some testing, and I purposely put them in a situation to make them purposely angry. And if they were a different sort of personality, reflective, composed, and so on and so forth, a together person, they won't get upset. But if they did get upset in a very violent way, I used to say to them, sorry, but I cannot, I'll give you one more chance. And then if you still didn't do well, I'm sorry, I cannot continue with that test, okay? They used to swear at me. They used to chuck the instrument, and they were very aggressive. And I used to say, okay, fine, I do understand you under pressure. You can go and there's a coffee machine there, have a coffee if you want to smoke. I was not encouraging smoking as well. Have a smoke and come back. And they would carry on doing the tests. And they used to say, sorry sir. So they became composed. So the next test would be an abstract thinking. To what extent, if I were to put them in a very difficult position, how can they use this emotional intelligence and their experiences and look at problems from a very critical, analytical perspective? And they came up with results. So I did that. So if they passed, then I put them into a precision mode. To what extent they're going to be precise. So they had different machinery. It's all in a lab. So they had to be tested for precision. Okay? And they had to score very high on that. Okay? So they did that. Mental fatigue, what I found was the highest cause of accident is mental fatigue. 80%, 90% of people, they failed because of the mental fatigue. You know, the way they had to think, the way they had to make decisions, the way they had to foresee what's going to be the next task and prepare themselves and so on. They had to not conduct themselves in a passive way, but in a very critical, analytical way. And not only that, they had to make sure that if they made a mistake, if they made an error, they learn about that quickly and they redress themselves. So if you don't have those sort of abilities, you commit the error, but you wouldn't redress it, and you continue making those errors. So we have to analyze whether they are in a learning mode or not. Okay. So just in summary, we had lots of electronic machines and so on and so forth. So I did that for about 4 years, and it was a very serious matter. And then we had to recommend to the management whether this particular person is going to be fit or not. Now, for me, with me having a health background, I was able to pick up health issues which could have been responsible for making errors. I picked up those people who were having drugs. Not just illicit drugs, but ordinary medical, medicine. And what I found was, if they were taking drugs, even alcohol, their reaction time was a fraction of a second. Just imagine you are conducting this truck, even if you're flying as a pilot, if you lose control for a fraction of a second, you press the wrong button or whatever, and you make a mistake, okay? So we prevented accident by 64%. And those machineries I used were the same machineries. That's going back a number of years ago now. 15 years ago or so, quite a long time, okay? But things have improved. So that was my experience of the field. I've had lots of incidences when we talk about human factors. I've been late to catching my plane because when I was doing consultancy work, I used to be jumping from one to the next and travel quite a bit. I used to be told off by the cabin crews. Mr. Jeeawody, don't you dare doing that. Do you know how many passengers are late because you are late by 2 minutes? I used to get, I said, sorry, I won't do it again. I did it again. Not because it's my habit, but because of the pressure of work I was in. So that was a decision. I could have left my previous job half an hour earlier to catch the plane. I didn't. So that's part of the human factor. Okay? I was traveling to Spain one day, and I missed the plane to Spain. I was in England, and the airport was not too far away from my place. I booked a taxi. The taxi was late. I was not foreseeing that. Taxi was late, despite phoning the taxi, came in late, took me to the airport, and I missed the plane. Can you imagine that? Going to Spain, I missed the plane. And the crew was so sympathetic. They were saying, sorry, don't worry, it happens, blah, blah, blah. we will put you on a plane and make sure that you will go to Spain. So from Gatwick Airport, the next airport was Luton Airport in the Midlands. So they actually booked the flight there and had to catch the train straight to Luton. And the plane was waiting for me on the tarmac. So I've had these sort of incidences. But one more example, when I got my lecturing job a long time ago in Bathurst, in New South Wales of Australia, I went for an interview, and then I had a lift from one of the staff from the airport, the local airport. He came down in his truck, took me to the airport, and he said to me, "You just go inside the building, feel your way through. Next to the door, there's a switch. You switch the light on, there's a coffee machine, you have a coffee, and I'll be back soon." So he left me all by myself. I was only person at the airport. I said, where the heck the coffee machine is? So I had to locate this little red light, and I managed to find a coffee machine and had a coffee. And I was waiting, and he came in with other passengers in the van. As soon as he came into the airport, he took the luggages and he loaded those luggages by himself on the plane. Yes, you are right, maybe thinking whether he is a pilot, and he was a pilot. So he was multi-skilled, and that was one of my experiences. A friend of mine was a pilot, so he took me on the single-engine airplane, and he gave me the steering, so I've been there. Okay, so I can make a lot of different examples of aeronautical. But when we talk about human factor, the very brief definition, especially from an aviation perspective, in aviation, human factors is dedicated to better understanding how humans can most safely and efficiently be integrated with the technology. That understanding is then translated into design, training policies, or procedures to help humans perform better. Okay? And there's another definition here. Human factors are issues affecting how people do their jobs. They are the social and personal skills, such as communication and decision making, which complement our technical skills. These are important for safe and efficient aviation. So I've got quite a few different definitions. Now, when I did the literature search, I came across this term. You may have come across this term as well. The human factors. It's called the dirty dozen. Have you heard of that? The dirty dozen. Okay, so there are 12 key factors we have to bear in mind when we are looking at human factors in aviation. And these factors are not just common to aviation, the field of aviation, but they're also common to other fields. Okay, we talk about lack of communication. We had a brief chat about communication. Communication is multi-pronged, not just verbal, visual, attitude, values, and all of those factors, will be part of that. If there are verbal communication, I give you a message. Sometimes we talk about Chinese whisper. You may have heard of Chinese whisper. You give a verbal message to somebody in the ears, and if I were to ask this person, can you please pass on this particular message to the person in the corner there? So by the time the ears goes there, just haywire. The message or messages keep changing. We cannot afford to have that in an aviation field. So communication has to be written, well documented. We cannot misunderstand those communication, and that's a problem. Research will show that communication is a problem in the aviation feel, okay? And the other form of communication, especially from a cabin crew's perspective and a pilot perspective, and this is where the human factors and the emotional well-being issue will come in. So when somebody is communicating with you verbally, I tend to not overanalyze, but I tend to analyze what is the content and what is the context of those emotional message, if you like. The verbal cues, the words which are communicated, may not be the same communicated emotionally. For example, I might say, I'm in pain. But when you look at my face, there's a little green little smile on my face. I'm not displaying the symptoms of pain, but I'm saying I've got pain. So these are some of the stuff we need to be aware of. The second dirty dozen, if you like, part of it, is complacency. Can be described as a feeling of self-satisfaction accomplished by a loss of awareness of potential dangers. So if the crew, cabin crews, they have been placed in a position of danger, if you like, and they have dealt with that, suddenly the way our mind works, we have a relief. Thank God we have dealt with that. I feel relieved because I have used my skill to deal with that situation. So next time the complacency comes up, we become less prepared to deal with similar situation. So if it goes on, then that's not very good news. Lack of knowledge. Now, your industry is very professional industry. It's very stringent to maintain standard. We talk about knowledge-based practice. Your practice is very much knowledge-based, research-based. You've got to review where you are at as far as your skills and knowledge go. We need to be keeping up to date. So we have what we call in our industry, or your industry, professional development points. As part of continuing professional education, professional development, okay? So you need to be up to date. You need to document. You need to create a logbook, okay? Your registering body wouldn't renew your license if you have not demonstrated that you have fulfilled so many hours of professional development activities and so on, okay? But there are lots of people who do it because it's a task. I will just do it without any seriousness in it, and that's not very good news. So when you're actually doing the professional development point, it's not just attending seminars like this and say, I have been listening to this particular presentation for an hour, so let me document that. It has to be coupled with experiences, documented experiences. It has to be coupled with supervision by senior, well-qualified, well-articulated individuals. And they're qualified people who are mentoring you, and they countersign your documentation just to safeguard. But when we talk about lack of knowledge, I have to do that in my profession. Medical people got to do that, psychologists got to do that. So we are locked into that, okay? Then we got distraction. We got lots of different distractions, especially from a personal perspective, okay? If your boss says, can I see you, we have to discuss your shift for next week, you got to be assertive. You got to say, sorry, I don't have time to discuss my shift today. That's not my priority for today. I'm engaged in my work. I'm doing essential work. But I have enough time, I would come and see you, then we can discuss that. But by the fact that he or she is a boss, we have to listen to our boss. So what we do is to leave whatever essential stuff we're doing, go and speak with the boss. Otherwise, you'll be in the back book. Okay? So we got that sort of thing. Fatigue. Fatigue is a natural physiological reaction. So once you're getting fatigued, you have to really be aware of that and do something about it. Like the trucking testing, when I discovered that these truck drivers would be prone to fatigue, and one of the recommendations I had to make as part of health promotion is to make sure that they undergo what we call a fatigue management course. Like if you're driving the truck, they have to stop after every 2 hours and so on and so forth. So there are different ways as part of the health promotion.
It's fatigue as opposed to tiredness, Professor.
Sorry?
That's fatigue you're talking about as opposed to tiredness.
Yeah, tiredness is, it's different.
Completely.
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 It's fatigue is more physiological. Why it's so different? Say, for example, if you're supposed to have 5-6 hours sleep, you have not had it for 1-2 days. Obviously, you will feel tiredness. Okay, but fatigue, there is more to it. Mental fatigue versus physical fatigue. They're two different things. But what I would like to say about fatigue, coming from a health background, fatigue is a clinical symptom as well. If you have got an underlying medical problem, for example, diabetes mellitus, heart problem, or some other problem, you'll be more prone to fatigue. Okay? So just because the person is fatigued, you can't say that the person is fatigued because he's overworking, whatever. We need to be mindful. This is where when I was testing the truck drivers, I had to make a recommendation to a medical specialist to have a full medical examination and so on and so forth. If I discovered that their reaction time was a bit slow, when I suspected that they are having drugs or alcohol, then we had to do a proper test. So fatigue is by the duration of the work and so on. A lack of resources, that's understandable. Pressure, that's also understandable. And lack of assertiveness, stress factors, I'll come back in a minute. Lack of awareness and norms. Norms is, I'm very, very, very serious about norms. If you're working or if you have been working in the industry for a number of years, we tend to take things for granted because we are hooked, we are adapted to a routine. We take things sometimes not too seriously. So it's a cultural norm. So what I'm saying here, when you look at the dirty dozens, all of these will be applicable to the field of aviation. Well, emotional wellness is to say it's having a positive attitude, high self-esteem, a strong sense of self, and the ability to recognize and share a wide range of feelings with others in a constructive way. Okay? And emotional well-being is our ability to understand the value of our emotions and use them to move life forward in positive directions. The PERMA model, which was devised by Martin Seligman, talks about positive emotions, engagement with individuals and others, the sort of relationship we have, everybody, and the meaning of communication, and also accomplishment. Now, leveraging experience of emotional well-being, and this is a key role in the aviation industry. We are there not to suppress people, depress people, but we are there to help them elevate their emotion, make them happy, make their journey happier, make them satisfied, enable them to do their job in an effective, productive way, and so on. So we've got a number of elements to consider. Things like rising level of sustenance and dignity, being fully engaged in an authentic way, and we have what we call authentic empowerment. mobilizing individual capacity, how we relate to others, physical and intellectual vitality, and a true sense of purpose. Now, when we look at mental health issue, I particularly am not very keen on the term mental health or mental. The moment you use the term mental, it has a stigma. Yeah. All right. It has a stigma. Nobody wants to be. And the moment you say to the cabin crew or the pilot, we have to do a mental assessment, that person will run away. And purposely, they won't come and be assessed purposely because of the fear of what the doctor is going to find. Even if you're feeling a bit depressed, depression is a day-to-day thing. When you're feeling a bit depressed today or for the week, that doesn't mean to say that you have got a long-term mental illness. But the fear is that, oh, goodness me, if I'm depressed, if I'm psychotic is bad news. I mean, I would appoint a person who is psychotic anyway. Okay, the psychotic. Because the person is not rational. But depression, anxiety, a bit of an obsessive compulsive thing, that's fine, okay? So everybody, 1 in 5 member of the community, of the population, they have some sort of mental health problem. And when we look at the aviation fraternity, and that's not exceptional. When I did some research, I found that high percentage of pilots have got, so to say, mental health problem. High percentage. Quite a few of them will be hiding their diagnosis. They will be forced to go and work in case they lose the job, in case they get labeled as somebody suffering from a mental health problem, in case they have got insurance problem and so on, so they hide it. And they hide it until they get involved in something very drastic. Suicide, for example, is not uncommon. When I used to do a lot of testing for executives, and I came across those executives committing suicide, okay, on the way back home from work, they used to hit the tree and they used to die instantly. Okay, number of cases like that. But we didn't discover whether they was depressed or not, and they were prone to suicide. But they did it. And when we did the forensic sort of assessment and examination and detective work, so to say, what we found that the family members would say that yes, they were subdued, they were a little bit depressed and so on and so forth. The reason why they hit the tree and died instantly was because of that stigma stuff. They used to say, well, if I had an accident and I killed myself, instant death, then it's good for the family. Good from the perspective that the community won't talk about your father, your husband, or whoever committed suicide. So they used to do that silently. When I looked at the literature, pilots who committed suicide, they didn't want to hide the documentation. They didn't want to talk about their illnesses or foreseeable illnesses. But they used to have just an episode, an incident, and that's how they killed themselves. Okay, so we got things like this to bear in mind. Now, in the cabin itself, the research will show that the cabin crews are trained to be extra nice. and they will suppress their own feelings, even if they are feeling angry, annoyed, distressed. They can't even go somewhere quietly and hit the door or shout and so on. So they can't. They're not allowed to do that. Okay. You may have heard of what we call a Jeeawody window. Yeah, this is the one, Jeeawody window. Person who created this model is Joe and Harry, two mates. Jeeawody window. All of us got a window. All of us, we are like a window. The frame number 1 is called the open self. Open self. A person who is open. Easy to talk with them. Easy to discuss with them. By the fact that they are open, if they have got any issues, any problem, they will pick a friend or a colleague or a therapist. They will come and sit down and discuss the matter. Open people. And it's a pleasure to be with open people. But on the other hand, we have got the hidden self. There are people who are not very open to talk about their issues. And we've got lots of those in the aviation industry. Particularly the pilot, because they are senior leaders, they are role model. They got to be right. And if they're not right, will they command respectability? That's what goes through the mind. So they camouflage their feeling. We end up with artificial smile and stuff like that. So they are in a bad situation, those who have got hidden self. If they have got issues inside them, they will keep it to themselves until they bottle up, and then it flares, and then they get the problem, okay? The hidden self, I hide things inside me. I don't open up because of who am I, personality-wise, and my role and so on. Then we've got the blind self. The blind self is, you know about me. I don't know about you. So if there are hidden stuff within me, I'm stressed out, I'm not making the right decision, or I'm about to make the wrong decision, you as a friend, you as a colleague, you as a peer, you discover that. Although I will deny it, you know, as an observer, that something is not quite right with me. So you will intervene, you will try to help this particular person. So as part of us, all of us, we have got the blind self. And we miss the boat, so to say. And these are the people who are in a risky position. We don't know until they open up. Okay? Now, what I'm most interested in is the fourth window, which is the unknown self. Okay? When you look at the dynamics of the crew members in aviation, none of them would have had a fantastic day, or fantastic month, or fantastic week. None of them are on the top of the world. They have all experienced different feelings, different difficulties. We talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic, if they have been, look, I tend to fly quite a bit. I have seen passengers shouting and calling names, and they are drunk. And we talk about cabin rage, and I've seen quite a few of that. You know, so if you are the cabin crew member, by the fact that you have had a certain type of training, nice, have to be very nice, and this and that, okay? So what's happening is you are being traumatized. When you go back home, you reflect on that. Or before you go back to the next flight, you are scared stiff, just in case you come across the same sort of episode. Once off, that's okay. You learn to control, you learn to deal. But if it's happening constantly, you tend to develop your own personality, because what you have is a continuous experience of post-traumatic stress disorder. Post is after a traumatic experience, which leads to stress and so on and so forth. Okay? Now, if you're not able to deal with that, you keep smiling, you are nice, as if nothing has happened. Where does that experience and information go to? They go in your subconscious mind. This is where the box is. The unknown self. They are accumulated there. They are accumulated until it bursts. And you have severe sort of mental health problem. The suicidal tendencies might come from that sort of experience as well. So we got to bear those factors in mind. Now, I looked at mental health problem amongst the pilot, particularly. What the citizen will be prone to, the pilots will be also prone to. When they are evaluated prior to employment, very similar to what I mentioned about the trucking firm, they have to go through different processes before they're employed. And once they're employed, they have to go for induction orientation program. They're assigned to a peer, a supervisor, a mentor. They're locked into training, and so on and so forth, health promotional activities. If they're prone to stress, they have to undergo stress management and so on and so forth. That's what we did for the trucks. And when I'm talking about the truck, it's not just a small truck here, the camion, huge trucks, okay? We talk about railroads, okay? So now, with the pilots, what literature is saying, they are not exception to mental illnesses. They are not. They have got all sort of depression, reactive depression. There's a depression called smiling depression. You may not have heard of that. Smiling depression. So if a person is looking very happy, very jolly, smiling, might give you, in a part of the communication, that might give you an indication that the person is happy. But the DSM-4, which is a diagnostic manual, will talk about smiling depression. So if you're talking with these colleagues, make sure that you observe them properly. Smiling doesn't mean to say that they're very happy. We have got silent depression within that. So we got that happening. Okay? We have got obsessive compulsive disorder. They are obsessed about things. They keep checking the logbook. They keep moving. They keep checking, the switch, the thing, and so on and so forth. Okay, they become so obsessed that is very distracting to them. Why they become obsessed like that is because they have got safety in their head. They are obsessed because just in case they make a mistake, they know the accountability. They are accountable to this. Okay, so much so that it becomes a syndrome. So once they have developed that obsessive-compulsive syndrome, they're not just working that way, with that sort of behavior in a cabin while they're working, but they will behave similarly with their peers. So they might lose credibility and so on, okay? Even psychotic disorders, schizophrenia. And for me, for example, I'm also a psychologist, so if I'm assessing a person like that, the moment I find that the person suffers from a psychotic illness, there's no. The person wouldn't be, and also your registering body will indicate that if they have got any form of psychotic illness, they are not to be employed. Psychotic means They have got neuroses. Neuroses is something to do with obsession, compulsive disorder, depression, and so on and so forth. But psychotic illness means the person's perception is not right. We talk about those five senses. They might be seeing things which are not there. They might be tasting things which is not there. They might be listening, hearing, and so on and so forth. All the five senses are haywire. They look okay, they look fine, but when they are in their psychotic episode, that's what they are having. So the psychologists, the medical officers, and the team will have to be very astute to find out if they have got underlying psychotic illnesses. Okay? It's no point saying, yes, they might have, let's wait and see. I wouldn't do that. I would just nip the bud. If there's any indication that they have got some form of psychosis, no, they can't get in. Okay? But research will show that there is a fairly large number of people who have got, especially pilots, who have got psychotic illnesses. Quite a lot of them have got home, domestic, social problems. A lot of them. Okay? And they're not able to cope with that. We talk about coping mechanism. We all got coping mechanism. We all got what we call resilience, the strength, inner strength. Not everybody has got that sort of inner strength. But if you don't have that, you're not able to cope with those stresses of life, and you're affected. Okay? Now, it's very interesting about the passengers. I mean, the cabin rage can be very common. Alcohol consumption is very common. Alcohol consumption starts from the beginning, from the airport, and that continues. Now there is also the marketing to blame as well. The moment you open up magazines and so on, what you have is advertisement about drinks and so on and so forth. They encourage you to buy the drinks and so on. Okay, so that's a big problem. And every time I fly in, unless I'm flying in the first class, there's such a push before you go and check in. Such a push when you go up trying to find a small space in the luggage compartment. You try to get in first so that you have got that larger space to push your cabin. Even push that space. Even that space is not next to your seat, you will find. So that creates a lot of friction. So the cabin crews will be very nice and very polite, try to cool and calm them. But it doesn't always work. Now, I can give you a lot of wearing my health background, health hat on. What we don't understand is the time difference or differences in different zones. There are very essential medication passengers will have to take. Medication for diabetes mellitus, hypertensive medication, hormone treatment, and so on and so forth. They are not able to take those medications according to the schedules because of the time zone. So they have side effects. For example, aggression. If a passenger is aggressive, straight away we can judge, potentially we can judge that the person is an aggressive person. So we use a different approach. But according to my research, according to my professional practice, I found that a lot of medications, they can cause aggressive behavior. It's a very common thing which is coming to mind if you're diabetic mellitus, suffering from diabetes. We talk about hypoglycemic attack. So if your sugar level is low in your body, and generally you are replacing that with medication and whatever, if you don't do that on time, You become very drowsy, you can become very aggressive. So if you're the cabin crew, treat the person as an aggressive person, that's the wrong thing to do together. Alcohol has got adverse effect, aggressiveness. So we need to be conscious of that. If anyone has got borderline mental health problem, we need to intervene from before they get into the plane. We need to alert the medical team for a proper assessment. You can't let them in if they have got psychotic illnesses, they're hallucinating or they're deluding. You've got to address that beforehand. Then also the big ethical problem is, for the cabin crew, the big ethical problem is, should you disclose this diagnosis in any way? If you have got a mental health problem, would you disclose that? Would you let the public, which becomes a small community on the plane, would you do anything to make the cabin passengers know that this particular person you're dealing with has got a mental health problem because of stigma and so on? So that's the dilemma is going to go on. So, look, I'm conscious of the time factor. I'm just giving you a taste of some of the stuff which we have got. I've got some information about COVID, which I won't have time to discuss that. But COVID is a big problem nowadays. I was invited to present at a symposium in Nepal how COVID is affecting that country. What I learned was in Nepal, for example, the educational system is not as great or grand as a developed country. So when we have all this information, all this instruction we're giving to the public, the big question mark we ask is to what extent the public is understanding. To what extent the public is understanding the purpose of wearing a mask and so on. That's a big dilemma. Okay, the other thing I learned was in Nepal, they faced conflicts, civil war. And what I learned was because of that experience of conflict, they built resilience, how to deal with that. So now that they are faced with the COVID, that resilience is working for them. So I learned that we shouldn't generalize strategies to deal with COVID across the way. Okay? In Mauritius, we are lucky. Educational system is good, people are understanding. But I get very disturbed when the hygiene is not maintained. We know about the hygiene, we know about wearing masks, washing hands, and so on and so forth. But when I take a walk on the main street, I get very alarmed. Not only because people are not wearing masks, or when they wear the mask on the chin, or like that, or just carrying it, they are not understanding the purpose of wearing the mask properly. And the other thing I get really alarmed about is spitting in the street. So we don't know what's the reasons why the COVID has not totally cleared from Mauritius. We're tending to blame, in a way, the passengers toing and froing from one country to the next. That's true. That's happening. But I think we need to also look at the general public, what's happening, and exercise discipline. Okay. Look, I'm going to stop here because I'm conscious of the hour and open up for questions. I've just snippets. I've just put on snippets. Okay. Emotional well-being. It's a fairly new term, and when I talk about the term emotional well-being, the general public is having difficulties in understanding what I mean. This is emotional well-being. I feel good about being here. You made me feel so welcome. It's a pleasure for me to share my information with you. You're not shouting at me. You're not yawning. Not even one person yawned or looked at the watch, wanting to go out and so on. So the messages I'm getting is very, very positive messages, and it's making me feel good. All right. So that's in a way emotional well-being. Just 2 minutes of your time. The Emotional Well-being Institute. That's my baby, so to say. I've researched that for about 5 or 6 years. And it's fully established in Geneva. It's registered in Geneva. It's global. It's global. We have created 18 regions across the world. And one region constitutes a number of nations. We just established an Indian Ocean region. We are about to register it. And in the Indian Ocean region, we have got Mauritius, La Réunion, Madagascar, Comoros, Seychelles, and so on and so forth, okay? So that's a cluster. We have appointed a cluster director, Dr. Amina Soifan, you might know of. She's been appointed the cluster director, so there will be committees and so on and so forth. Shares Riviere is a very good friend of mine. We've been friends for a number of years. We have got a global advisory board, and we have invited Shares Riviere to be a member of that global advisory board because of his connection, travel, knowledge, and so on and so forth. There's another person who's a member, Italian, Peter De Lorenzo, based in Australia. So I'm headhunting for other members who will be the global advisory member. So looking at the 18 cluster regions, I'm talking with a team from Canada. They're very highly experienced, highly qualified people. So there will be a cluster region in Canada with a cluster director. We just appointed a cluster director for that region. We've got scientists, experts in different fields. We got a chapter just been established in Australia. We have got the inauguration happening on the 15th, next week Thursday, and I'm speaking with them from here. We have got a cluster director. They have already established a board, and they're looking at strategies for implementation. They're looking at rural health. Australia got problems with flooding, fire, indigenous issues, so they will be working in that area. We have got a region in Nepal. I'm talking with a group from Denmark, so there will be a cluster there. So the role of the Emotional Wellbeing Institute is to look at emotional well-being. How can we leverage emotional well-being? How can we uplift emotional well-being of the society, of nations, of all age group, of all type of individuals? I became very, very critical about the term mental health. They were talking about how can we leverage mental health. But when we look at societies, when we look at Mauritius, for example, we've got well over 200, nearly 300 NGOs in Mauritius. NGOs, they're working to uplift the community, uplift the society. But I'm very, very critical. Do they talk to each other? Do they know which society is which? What are they doing? Do they get together? It's severe competition. When we talk about being an advocate, everybody wants to be an advocate. Everybody wants to be there. I want to be the director, I want to be this, I want to be that. It's a warm fuzzy American term. But it's not advancing. When you look at mental health, for example, in our society, it's not advancing. What we are doing is running society-wide. But how the people, how the community is feeling, they are still lagging behind. And my understanding, based on my research, is they should be parallel. So whatever you do, they should go hand in hand. Same as the aviation company, aviation industry. Whatever you do to alleviate the industry, improve the industry, training-wise and so on and so forth. Whatever you do, it should go hand in hand with whatever your objectives are. If you want to make the aviation society a flourishing society, so if you're doing in-service training, new programs, new courses, change attitude and so on, that should go hand in hand with the effectiveness. So if it's not happening, the problems are still there. Question you have to ask is to what extent what you're doing is working. So that's what we're finding in the area of emotional well-being. So then I thought, oh goodness me, let me use a pluralistic approach. So I put my health hat on, I put my mental health hat on, my psychology hat on, my multicultural hat on, my international hat on. Okay? And I decided that what we are doing will only work if we work together and also have an eclectic approach, multifaceted approach. So whatever you're doing in the aviation industry, don't do it in a competitive way. You are a society. You show that I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to show that what I'm doing is better, or the best. Rather than that, you ask how many other societies are involved in ameliorating the work you're doing. How can we work together? How can we work together? That's the only way things will move. Okay? Mauritius, for example, one of the key industry in Mauritius is flying and industry, tourism. It's a bread and butter of Mauritius, to be frank. Particularly now, in this climate, things are not easy, things are very, very difficult. So how can we work together to make it happen? Okay? I accepted your invitation. It's not my field of expertise. I spent a number of hours to research, to find out a bit more, to become more informed, and to share my knowledge with you. So thank you for the opportunity, and I'm quite happy to answer questions.